The morning started like any other Tuesday for Richard Hawthorne. At 68, the tech billionaire still kept the same routine he'd followed for 20 years. Black coffee at 5:30, 40 minutes on the treadmill, and 3 newspapers before most people even hit their snooze button. But this Tuesday would be different. Richard sat at the head of the massive oak table in his Manhattan office, surrounded by 12 of his company's top executives. The quarterly board meeting was running longer than usual. Numbers were down, competitors were gaining ground, and the pressure was mounting. His company, Hawthorne Industries, had built half the world's smartphones, but lately, the empire felt like it was slipping through his fingers. The Asian markets are showing resistance to our new model, his finance director was saying, pointing to charts that painted a grim picture. We're looking at a possible 15% drop in projected earnings. Richard rubbed his temples. The headache that had been bothering him all morning was getting worse. He'd had headaches before, but this one felt different. Heavier, like someone was pressing down on his skull with their hands. "Sir, are you all right?" asked his assistant, Jennifer, who had been taking notes from the corner of the room. Richard tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come. The room started spinning slowly, like he was on a merry-go-round that someone forgot to stop. The faces around the table blurred together. The charts on the wall seemed to melt and run like watercolors in the rain. Then everything went black. When Richard hit the floor, the conference room exploded into chaos. Jennifer screamed. 2 executives rushed to his side while another called 911. Within minutes, paramedics were racing through the halls of the 50-story building, their equipment clattering against the marble floors. "He's breathing," one paramedic announced, checking Richard's pulse. "Heartbeat steady. Blood pressure's normal, but he's completely unresponsive." They loaded him onto a stretcher and rushed him to Mount Sinai Hospital. News vans were already gathering outside the building. When a billionaire collapses, the world takes notice, but Richard's wife, Margaret, had other plans. "I'm not leaving him in some hospital," she told Dr. Lisa Park, Richard's personal physician who had rushed to meet them at the emergency room. "Bring whatever equipment you need to the house. Money is no object." Dr. Park had been Richard's doctor for over a decade. She'd seen him through 2 minor heart attacks, a bout with kidney stones, and countless stress-related ailments that came with running a global empire. But she'd never seen anything like this. "Margaret, I understand your concern, but the hospital has resources that—" "No." Margaret's voice was firm. "Too many reporters, too many people asking questions. He needs privacy to recover. Set up everything at the Hampton House." Within 6 hours, the Hawthorne estate had been transformed into a private medical facility. Monitors beeped softly in what used to be the library. EV stands stood next to antique furniture that had been in the family for generations. The smell of disinfectant mixed with the ocean breeze that usually filled the house. Rosa Martinez watched it all unfold from the kitchen window. She'd been the Hawthorne family's housekeeper for 15 years, and in that time she'd seen Richard through good times and bad. She'd cleaned up after late-night business calls that went wrong, had served coffee during emergency meetings, and had even held Margaret's hand during Richard's previous health scares, but this felt different. Worse. "Mom, what's happening?" asked Elena, Rosa's 22-year-old daughter, as she walked into the kitchen carrying her medical textbooks. Elena was home from college for the summer, taking a break from her pre-med studies to help with the family finances. "Mr. Hawthorne collapsed at work," Rosa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The doctors don't know what's wrong with him." Elena set her books on the counter and looked out the window. She could see men in white coats moving equipment into the house. "Did they say it was his heart?" "No, that's the strange part. His heart is fine. Everything seems fine. But he won't wake up. Won't respond to anything." Dr. Park had called in favors from across the country. Within 24 hours, the best medical minds in America were either at the Hawthorne estate or consulting via video calls. Neurologists from Johns Hopkins, heart specialists from the Cleveland Clinic, and infectious disease experts from the CDC, Dr. Michael Torres, a neurologist from Boston, was the first to examine Richard in the makeshift medical room. He shined lights in Richard's eyes, tested his reflexes, and ran every neurological test he could think of. "Brain activity is normal," he announced to the growing team of doctors. "No signs of stroke, no indication of trauma. It's like his brain is working perfectly, but something's blocking the signals from getting through." Dr. Amanda Foster, a toxicologist from Atlanta, arrived the next morning with a team of lab technicians. "Could be poisoning," she said, drawing blood samples. "There are compounds that can cause this kind of paralysis without affecting vital organs." The blood tests came back clean. Dr. Robert Kim, a psychiatrist from California, suggested it might be psychological. Extreme stress can cause the mind to shut down completely. It's rare but possible. But Richard showed no signs of the trauma that usually accompanied psychological breaks. As the days passed, more specialists arrived. Elena watched them come and go, each one confident they had the answer, each one leaving more puzzled than when they arrived. 20 of the country's top doctors had now examined Richard Hawthorne, and he remained as unresponsive as the day he collapsed. The media was having a field day. Hawthorne Industries' stock price dropped 20% in the first week. Competitors started making moves to acquire smaller companies that Richard's empire had been courting. Business rivals who had feared Richard for decades suddenly smelled blood in the water. But in the converted library of the Hampton estate, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the steady beeping of machines and the shallow breathing of a man who had built a technology empire but couldn't seem to find his way back to consciousness. Elena found herself drawn to the room. Between her summer job at the local pharmacy and helping her mother with household duties, she would sit quietly in the corner, supposedly reading her textbooks, but actually watching the doctors work, watching the machines, watching her mother's worried face as she brought tea to the medical team, and watching Richard Hawthorne, lying still as stone, trapped somewhere between waking and sleeping, between living and dying. Nobody knew that Elena's careful observation would soon uncover what 20 brilliant doctors had missed. 3 weeks had passed since Richard Hawthorne collapsed, and the Hampton estate had become something no one ever expected it would be. A place where hope went to die. Every morning Rosa would walk past the converted library and hear the same sounds. Beeping machines, hushed conversations between doctors, and Margaret's quiet sobs when she thought no one was listening. The house that once hosted garden parties and business celebrations now felt like a tomb, where everyone was waiting for the inevitable. Dr. Lisa Park hadn't slept properly in weeks. Dark circles shadowed her eyes as she reviewed test results for the 100th time. She'd called in every favor she had, reached out to medical schools across the country, and even contacted colleagues in Europe and Asia. Everyone had theories. No one had answers. "I think we should try the experimental treatment from Switzerland," suggested Dr. James Wilson, a specialist in rare neurological disorders who had flown in from Chicago. He stood over Richard's still form, holding a clipboard thick with notes and theories. "We tried that approach with the last patient in Geneva," replied Dr. Catherine Reed, an expert in mysterious medical cases who had arrived from London 2 days earlier. The side effects were worse than the original condition. Elena sat in her usual corner, pretending to study for her summer chemistry class while listening to every word. Over the past 3 weeks, she had heard more medical terminology than most people learn in a lifetime. The doctors had tried everything from exotic vitamins to experimental drugs that cost more than most people's houses. Nothing worked. Outside the estate, the world was falling apart. Hawthorne Industries stock had crashed so hard that trading was suspended twice in 1 week. Competitors were swooping in like vultures, trying to steal major contracts that Richard's company had spent years building. The business empire that had taken 40 years to create was crumbling in 40 days. CNN had a permanent news van parked outside the estate gates. Every major newspaper in the world was running daily updates about Richard's condition, though Margaret had banned all media from the property. Reporters tried everything from dressing as delivery drivers to bribing gardeners for inside information. The Asian markets opened down another 12%. Jennifer reported during one of her daily visits. She brought business updates that Margaret insisted on hearing, even though everyone knew Richard couldn't respond to them. "Tell the board to hold everything together," Margaret said. Her voice strained from weeks of stress and sleepless nights. "Richard will wake up. He has to." But even Margaret was starting to lose faith. Dr. Park brought in Dr. Vincent Hayes, a specialist in toxicology from the Mayo Clinic, who had solved 3 cases of mysterious poisoning in the past year. He spent 2 days running every test imaginable, looking for everything from rare plant toxins to synthetic chemicals that might not show up in standard blood work. I've tested for over 300 different compounds, Dr. Hayes announced to the assembled medical team. Everything from exotic spider venoms to military-grade nerve agents. His blood is cleaner than most healthy people's. Elena watched Dr. Hayes pack up his equipment, another expert adding his name to the list of professionals who had failed to solve the mystery. She had started keeping a notebook, writing down everything she observed. Not just about Richard's condition, but about everything happening in the house. She noticed that Dr. Torres checked his watch every time he entered the room. She saw that Dr. Foster always wore the same lucky pen when examining patients. She observed that Margaret held Richard's left hand, never his right because she said it was warmer. Most people would have called these details meaningless, but Elena was studying to become a doctor, and her professors had hammered one thing into her head over and over again. Observation is everything. The problem, Dr. Reed was explaining to the group, is that we're dealing with something that doesn't fit any known pattern. His brain shows normal activity, but he's completely unresponsive. His body functions perfectly, but he might as well be in a deep coma. Dr. Wilson nodded grimly. I've seen thousands of neurological cases, and I've never encountered anything like this. It's as if someone flipped a switch in his brain and turned off his ability to interact with the world. Elena wrote that down too. The staff at the estate had been incredible throughout the ordeal. Rosa worked 18-hour days, making sure the doctors had everything they needed while keeping the household running. The cook, Mrs. Patterson, prepared meals for a small army of medical professionals. The groundskeepers kept reporters away from the windows, but Elena noticed something else. She noticed that everyone was tired. Everyone except David Webb, Richard's private nurse who had been hired specifically to provide round-the-clock care. David had been a registered nurse for 15 years before taking the position with the Hawthorns. He came with perfect references, experience in private care, and a calm demeanor that everyone appreciated during the crisis. He was always alert, always professional, always ready with whatever medical supplies the doctors needed. David's been a godsend, Dr. Park confided to Margaret one afternoon. I don't know how we would have managed without him. Elena watched David work. She noticed how carefully he administered Richard's medications, how precisely he monitored the IV drips, how methodically he recorded every detail of Richard's care. The doctors praised his attention to detail, but Elena noticed something the doctors didn't. She noticed that David always seemed to be around when Richard showed any tiny signs of response. A slight twitch of the fingers, a barely perceptible change in breathing. Small movements that gave everyone hope for about 5 seconds before Richard returned to his unresponsive state. Did you see that? Margaret would ask excitedly whenever these moments happened. He moved his hand. He's trying to wake up. The doctors would rush over, run tests, check monitors, and find nothing. No change in brain activity. No improvement in his condition. Just those brief, mysterious moments that kept everyone believing in miracles. Elena started writing down the times when these episodes occurred. Tuesday at 2:47 p.m., Thursday at 3:15 p.m., Saturday at 2:33 p.m. She wasn't sure why she was tracking them, but something about the timing bothered her. As the fourth week began, desperation was setting in. Margaret had spent over $2 million on medical consultations. 23 specialists had now examined Richard, including experts flown in from Germany, Japan, and Australia. The library looked like a small hospital, filled with millions of dollars worth of equipment, and Richard Hawthorne remained as unresponsive as the day he collapsed. We need to consider other options. Dr. Park finally told Margaret during a private conversation that Elena happened to overhear from the hallway. Long-term care facilities may be moving him to a specialized clinic. No, Margaret's voice cracked. He's staying here. He's going to wake up in his own home. Elena closed her notebook and walked upstairs to her room. She had 3 pages of observations now, filled with details that probably didn't matter to anyone but her. Times, dates, behaviors, patterns that she was starting to see but couldn't quite understand. Outside her window, she could see the news vans still waiting at the gates. The whole world was watching, waiting for updates on a man who had built a technology empire but couldn't seem to find his way back to consciousness. Elena opened her chemistry textbook, but her mind kept wandering back to her notebook. Something was there, hiding in all those details she'd been collecting. She just had to figure out what it was. Elena couldn't sleep. It was past midnight and she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her notebook open beside her. For the past 5 weeks, she had been writing down everything she observed about Richard's condition, and tonight, something was nagging at her brain like a splinter under her fingernail. She flipped through the pages again, reading her own handwriting by the light of her phone. 27 doctors had now examined Richard. 27 of the smartest medical minds in the world, and not one of them could explain why a perfectly healthy billionaire had simply stopped responding to the world around him. But Elena wasn't focused on what the doctors couldn't explain. She was focused on something else entirely: the timing. Every time Richard showed those brief signs of life, those tiny movements that gave everyone hope, Elena had written down the exact time. At first, she thought she was just being thorough, the way her pre-med professors had taught her to document everything. But now, looking at the pattern, she realized she had stumbled onto something. Tuesday, 2:47 p.m., Thursday, 3:15 p.m., Saturday, 2:33 p.m., Monday, 2:51 p.m. Every single episode happened between 2:30 and 3:30 in the afternoon. Every single one. Elena sat up in bed. That couldn't be a coincidence. Medical conditions didn't follow schedules. Brain injuries didn't check their watches. So why was Richard only showing signs of response during that specific hour every few days? She threw on her robe and crept downstairs. The house was quiet except for the soft beeping of medical equipment from the library. Margaret had finally started sleeping in her own bed instead of the chair next to Richard, though Elena knew she barely got more than a few hours each night. Elena padded softly to the kitchen, where her mother Rosa was sitting at the small table, drinking tea and staring out the window at the dark ocean. "Can't sleep either?" Rosa asked without turning around. "Mom, can I ask you something?" Elena pulled out a chair and sat down. "Have you noticed anything strange about Mr. Hawthorne's care?" Rosa frowned. "Strange how?" "The doctors are doing everything they can." "Not the doctors. I mean, the routine, the daily care. Have you noticed any patterns?" Rosa was quiet for a moment, sipping her tea. "I don't know what you mean, honey. David takes excellent care of him. The doctors all say so. He's very professional, very precise with the medications and treatments." Elena nodded, but something in her mother's voice made her look closer. Rosa seemed stressed about more than just Richard's condition. She had been jumpy lately, dropping things, forgetting simple tasks she'd done perfectly for 15 years. "Mom, is everything okay? You seem worried about something else." Rosa set down her teacup with shaking hands. "I'm fine. Just tired. We're all tired." But Elena could tell her mother was lying. Rosa had been acting strange for weeks, and it wasn't just concern for Richard. There was something else bothering her, something she wasn't talking about. The next morning, Elena decided to pay closer attention to the daily routine. She positioned herself in the hallway where she could see into the converted library without being obvious about it. Her summer job at the pharmacy had taught her about medications and timing, and she wanted to observe the precise schedule that David followed with Richard's care. At 9 a.m., David administered Richard's morning medications through his IV. Elena recognized some of them from her pharmaceutical training: vitamins, supplements to prevent blood clots, nutrients to keep his body functioning while he remained unconscious. At noon, David checked all the monitors, recorded Richard's vital signs, and adjusted the IV drip rates according to the doctor's instructions. At 2 p.m., David gave Richard his afternoon medications, and at 2:30 p.m., like clockwork, Richard showed those brief signs of response that had everyone hoping for a breakthrough. Elena wrote it all down, but something bothered her. The timing was too precise, too predictable. In all her medical classes, professors had emphasized that the human body didn't work like a machine. Responses to treatment varied. Symptoms changed randomly. Recovery happened in unpredictable bursts and setbacks. But Richard's responses happened with the precision of a Swiss watch. That afternoon, Dr. Park brought in yet another specialist, Dr. Benjamin Cross, an expert in metabolic disorders from Texas. Elena watched him examine Richard, run the same tests that 26 other doctors had already performed, and shake his head in bewilderment. "I've never seen anything like it," Dr. Cross admitted to the assembled medical team. "Every system in his body is functioning. normally, but it's like there's a wall between his consciousness and his ability to respond. Elena listened from her corner, pretending to study while actually paying attention to every word. The doctors were brilliant, dedicated people who genuinely wanted to help. But they were all focused on finding something wrong with Richard. What if the problem wasn't with Richard at all? That evening, Elena approached David Webb directly. He was updating Richard's medication chart, writing notes in his precise handwriting about dosages and timing. "Mr. Webb, can I ask you about the medications?" Elena tried to sound casual, like a curious pre-med student, rather than someone conducting an investigation. David looked up and smiled. He was a pleasant man in his 40s, always calm and professional. "Of course, are you thinking about specializing in nursing?" "Maybe. I'm interested in how you manage such complex medication schedules. It must be difficult to get the timing exactly right." "Not really," David said, returning to his charts. "It's all about precision and routine. Same medications at the same times every day. That's how you avoid mistakes." Elena nodded, but her mind was racing. Same medications at the same times every day. But what if one of those medications wasn't supposed to be there? She excused herself and went to her room, where she pulled out her phone and started researching. Her summer job at the pharmacy had given her access to medication databases, and she knew how to look up drug interactions, side effects, and unusual uses for common medications. For the next 3 hours, Elena researched every medication she had seen David administer to Richard. Most were standard treatments for unconscious patients: vitamins, blood thinners, nutrients. Everything looked normal, but then she found something that made her blood run cold. One of the medications David was giving Richard wasn't on any of the doctor's prescription lists. Elena had seen him administer it every afternoon at 2 p.m., just 30 minutes before Richard's brief responsive episodes. It was a medication she recognized from her pharmaceutical training, but it wasn't being used for its intended purpose. It was a muscle relaxant, but in very specific doses. It could cause temporary paralysis that would wear off gradually, creating the exact pattern of brief responsiveness that everyone was interpreting as signs of recovery. Elena stared at her phone screen, reading the medication information over and over again. Someone was giving Richard a paralytic drug every afternoon, just enough to keep him unresponsive while making it look like he was fighting to wake up. Someone was deliberately keeping Richard Hawthorne unconscious, and that someone was the trusted nurse, who had been praised by every doctor for his excellent care. Elena's hand shook as she closed her phone. She needed proof before she could accuse anyone of such an horrible thing. But the pieces were falling into place like a jigsaw puzzle she had been working on for weeks without realizing it. The timing of the medications, the predictable pattern of Richard's responses, her mother's strange behavior and obvious stress about something she wouldn't discuss. David Webb wasn't taking care of Richard Hawthorne. He was slowly poisoning him, keeping him trapped between consciousness and sleep, while the world watched and waited for a miracle that would never come. Elena looked out her window at the news van still camped outside the gates. Tomorrow, she would have to figure out how to prove what she suspected, and she would have to do it without David Webb realizing that his perfect crime was about to unravel. The maid's daughter had finally noticed what 27 doctors had missed. Elena barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw David Webb's calm face as he administered medications to Richard, medications that were supposed to help, but were actually keeping him trapped in his own body. She had discovered something terrible, but proving it was going to be the hardest thing she'd ever done. The next morning, Elena forced herself to act normal. She helped her mother prepare breakfast for the medical team, smiled politely at the doctors, and pretended to study her textbooks. But inside, her mind was racing with plans and possibilities. She needed evidence, real proof that would convince Dr. Park and the other specialists. Accusations without evidence would just sound like the wild theories of a college student who had been watching too many medical dramas. At 10 a.m., Elena volunteered to help David organize the medical supplies. "I'm thinking about nursing school too," she told him with her brightest smile. "Maybe I could learn by watching you work." David seemed pleased by her interest. "Of course. It's always good to see young people interested in healthcare." Elena spent the morning shadowing David, taking mental notes of everything he did. She watched him prepare Richard's medications, noting exactly which vials he used and how much of each medication he drew into the syringes. When David stepped out to speak with Dr. Park, Elena quickly photographed the medication labels with her phone. That afternoon, Elena positioned herself where she could watch David's 2 p.m. medication routine. She saw him draw medication from a small vial that he kept in a separate case, different from the medications prescribed by the doctors. He was careful about it, looking around before adding it to Richard's IV line. 30 minutes later, right on schedule, Richard showed those brief signs of responsiveness that had everyone believing he was fighting to wake up. Elena's heart pounded. She had witnessed it with her own eyes, but she still needed more proof. That evening, Elena called her best friend Jake, who was studying chemistry at a different college. "I need a favor," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need you to help me identify a medication, but I can't tell you why right now." "That sounds mysterious and probably dangerous," Jake replied. "What are you getting yourself into?" "I think someone is being poisoned, but I need to be sure before I go to the police." There was a long pause. "Elena, if you really think someone is being hurt, you should go to the authorities right away." "I will, but I need proof first. Can you help me or not?" Jake sighed. "What do you need?" Elena described the medication she had seen David use, giving him the details she had photographed. Jake promised to research it and call her back within a few hours. While she waited for Jake's call, Elena decided to talk to her mother. Rosa had been acting strange for weeks, and Elena suspected she might know more than she was admitting. She found Rosa in the laundry room, folding towels with nervous energy. "Mom, I need to ask you something important, and I need you to tell me the truth." Rosa looked up, her eyes filled with worry. "What is it? Have you noticed anything unusual about David? Anything that doesn't seem right?" Rosa dropped the towel she was holding. Her hands were shaking. "Why are you asking me this?" "Because I think he's hurting Mr. Hawthorne, and I think you suspect it too." Rosa sat down heavily in a nearby chair, her face pale. For a long moment she said nothing. Then in a voice barely above a whisper she said, "I've been so scared." "Scared of what?" "Last week I was cleaning the library while David was preparing medications. He stepped out for a moment and I accidentally knocked over his medical case. When I picked up the contents, I saw a vial of something that wasn't on any of the doctor's lists." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "Did you recognize it?" "My brother is a paramedic. He showed me pictures of different medications once, teaching me what to look for in emergencies. The vial looked like something he said was used to paralyze people during surgery." "Mom, why didn't you tell anyone?" Rosa's eyes filled with tears. "Because I wasn't sure, and because David saw me pick up his case. He gave me this look like he was warning me to keep quiet. I've been terrified ever since." Elena knelt beside her mother's chair and took her hands. "We have to tell Dr. Park tonight. What if we're wrong? What if we ruin an innocent man's reputation? And what if we're right and Mr. Hawthorne dies because we were too scared to speak up?" Before Rosa could respond, Elena's phone rang. It was Jake. "Elena, you need to call the police right now." Jake's voice was urgent. "That medication you described? It's called rocuronium. It's a paralytic agent used in surgery, but in small doses given repeatedly it would keep someone conscious but completely unable to move or respond." Elena's blood turned to ice. "Are you sure?" "Completely sure. Elena, whoever is giving this to someone is basically torturing them. They would be aware of everything happening around them, but unable to communicate or move. It's one of the cruelest things you could do to a person." Elena hung up the phone and looked at her mother. "We're calling Dr. Park right now." "Elena, what if David finds out? What if he tries to hurt us? Then we'll call the police too. But we can't wait any longer. Mr. Hawthorne has been trapped inside his own body for over a month, aware of everything but unable to cry for help." Rosa covered her face with her hands. "Oh my God, that poor man." Elena helped her mother to her feet. "Come on. We're going to Dr. Park's room right now." They found Dr. Park in the guest bedroom she had been using, reviewing medical files for the 100th time. She looked exhausted and frustrated, no closer to solving Richard's mysterious condition than she had been 5 weeks ago. "Dr. Park, we need to talk to you about something urgent," Elena said. The doctor looked up, probably expecting another well-meaning suggestion from the family. "What is it?" "I think David Webb is poisoning Mr. Hawthorne." Dr. Park's expression changed immediately. "That's a very serious accusation, Elena. What makes you think that?" Elena pulled out her notebook and her phone. For the next 20 minutes she laid out everything she had observed. The precise timing of Richard's responses, the unauthorized medication, the research Jake had done, her mother's witness account of the suspicious vial. Dr. Park listened without interrupting, her expression growing more grave with each detail. "If what you're saying is true," Dr. Park finally said, "Richard has been conscious this entire time, aware of everything happening around him but unable to respond. That's exactly what my friend's research indicated." Dr. Park stood up and began pacing. "We need to test Richard's blood immediately, but we have to do it without David knowing. If he suspects we're onto him, he might try to cover his tracks or—" She didn't finish the sentence. "Or hurt Mr. Hawthorne worse," Elena finished. "Or hurt all of us," Dr. Park said grimly. "Elena, you and your mother may have just solved the biggest medical mystery of my career. But now we have to prove it without putting anyone else in danger." Elena looked at her mother, who was crying quietly in her chair. They had crossed a line they couldn't uncross. Tomorrow they would have to confront a man who had spent weeks slowly torturing someone while appearing to be his devoted caregiver. The maid's daughter had finally found the courage to speak the truth that 27 doctors had been unable to see. Dr. Park barely slept that night. She spent hours reviewing Elena's evidence and making phone calls to colleagues who specialized in paralytic drug poisoning. Every expert she spoke to confirmed what Jake had discovered. Rocuronium given in small, repeated doses would create exactly the symptoms Richard had been showing. By dawn, Dr. Park had a plan. "We need to test Richard's blood without David knowing," she told Elena and Rosa as they huddled together in the kitchen at 6 a.m. "But more importantly, we need to document everything David does today. If we're going to accuse him of attempted murder, we need ironclad evidence." Elena felt her stomach twist with nerves. "What do you want us to do?" "I'm going to draw Richard's blood myself this morning, telling David it's for routine testing. Meanwhile, I need you to record everything David does during his 2 p.m. medication routine. Can you do that without him noticing?" Elena nodded, though her hands were already shaking. "I can hide in the hallway with my phone. Rosa, I need you to act completely normal. Don't give David any reason to suspect we know what he's been doing." Rosa wiped tears from her eyes. "That poor man has been suffering for over a month because I was too scared to speak up sooner." "You couldn't have known for certain," Dr. Park said gently. "But now we can help him." At 8 a.m., Dr. Park entered the library where Richard lay unconscious, hooked up to the machines that had kept him alive for 38 days. David was checking the morning medication schedule, the same professional routine he had followed perfectly for weeks. "David, I'd like to draw additional blood samples today," Dr. Park said casually. "I want to test for some rare metabolic disorders that the other specialists might have missed." David looked up with his usual helpful expression. "Of course, doctor. Should I prepare the standard collection tubes?" "Yes, that would be perfect." Elena watched from the doorway as Dr. Park drew several vials of Richard's blood. If she was right, those tests would finally prove what had been happening to Richard all these weeks. The morning passed with agonizing slowness. Elena tried to study, but she couldn't concentrate on anything except watching the clock. At 1:45 p.m., she positioned herself in the hallway where she could see into the library without being obvious. David arrived precisely at 2 p.m., carrying his medical case and wearing the same calm expression he'd had every day for over a month. Elena started recording on her phone, her heart beating so loudly she was afraid David would hear it. She watched David prepare Richard's official medications first, the ones prescribed by the doctors. Then, exactly as she had witnessed the day before, he opened a separate compartment in his case and withdrew a small vial. Elena zoomed in as much as her phone would allow, capturing David drawing liquid from the unauthorized vial into a syringe. She recorded him checking the hallway nervously before injecting the medication into Richard's IV line. Elena stopped recording and hurried to Dr. Park's room. "I got it," she whispered, showing the doctor the video. "Everything you need to see." Dr. Park watched the recording twice, her expression growing darker each time. "Elena, you've just recorded evidence of attempted murder. We need to call the police immediately." Within an hour, Detective Ray Morrison arrived at the estate along with 2 other officers. Elena had never seen police cars inside the Hampton property before, and their presence made everything feel suddenly real and terrifying. Dr. Park met with Detective Morrison privately first, showing him Elena's evidence and explaining the medical details of what had been happening to Richard. When Detective Morrison emerged from that meeting, his expression was grim. "We're going to need to test those blood samples immediately," he told Dr. Park, "and we'll need to arrest David Webb before he realizes we're onto him." But when they went to find David, he was gone. "He left about 20 minutes ago," Margaret told them, her face pale with shock as she learned what had been happening under her own roof. "He said he was going to the pharmacy to pick up supplies." Detective Morrison immediately radioed for patrol cars to search for David's vehicle. "He's probably realized we discovered his scheme and is trying to run." Elena sat in the kitchen with her mother, both of them shaking with a mixture of relief and terror. They had done the right thing, but David Webb was still out there somewhere, and they didn't know what he might do when he realized his perfect crime had been exposed. 2 hours later, Detective Morrison received a call. David had been found at the airport trying to board a flight to Mexico with a fake passport. He was arrested without incident, but the most important news came from the hospital lab. "Richard's blood contains massive amounts of rocuronium," Dr. Park announced to the assembled group. Elena was absolutely right. David has been systematically paralyzing him for over 5 weeks. "How long until the drug leaves his system?" Margaret asked, tears streaming down her face. "It should start wearing off within hours now that we've stopped the daily doses." "But Margaret, you need to understand. Richard has been conscious this entire time. He's experienced everything that's happened around him but been unable to respond." Elena felt sick thinking about what Richard had endured. Hearing doctors discuss his case, listening to business associates worried about his company, feeling his wife hold his hand and beg him to wake up, but being completely unable to move or speak. The first signs of improvement came that evening. Richard's fingers began to twitch, not the brief movements everyone had seen before, but sustained, purposeful motion. By midnight, he was squeezing Margaret's hand in response to her voice. By the next morning, Richard Hawthorne was awake. "Water" was the first word he spoke after 39 days of forced silence. His voice was barely a whisper, but it was the most beautiful sound Margaret had heard in over a month. Within hours, news crews from around the world were reporting Richard's miraculous recovery. But inside the estate, Elena sat quietly with her mother, watching a man slowly return to life. "How did you know?" Richard asked Elena during one of his first conversations. His voice was still weak, but his mind was sharp. 27 doctors examined me and none of them figured it out." "I just paid attention to patterns," Elena said simply. "Medical school taught me that everything happens for a reason, even things that seem random." Richard looked at this young woman who had saved his life by noticing what everyone else had missed. "What do you want to study in medical school?" "I was thinking about general practice, but now I think I want to specialize in diagnostic medicine. Helping doctors solve mysteries like this one." "Then that's exactly what you're going to do," Richard said. "I'm going to make sure you have whatever you need to become the best diagnostic doctor in the country." 3 months later, David Webb was sentenced to 25 years in prison for attempted murder and conspiracy. The trial revealed that he had been planning to let Richard die slowly while manipulating stock prices and profiting from insider trading information. Elena started her senior year of college with a full scholarship funded by the Hawthorne Foundation for Diagnostic Medicine. She graduated with honors 2 years later and was accepted to Harvard Medical School, where she specialized in exactly the kind of careful observation and pattern recognition that had saved Richard's life. Today, Dr. Elena Martinez runs a diagnostic clinic where she teaches other doctors the importance of looking beyond complex medical theories to notice the simple patterns that everyone else might miss. Her first case, the one that taught her to trust her observations, remains the most important save of her career. Sometimes the biggest mysteries are solved not by the most educated experts, but by someone who simply pays attention to what everyone else overlooks.